we are on now. And we should be on Twitch and on other places.
So anything that I say now, people can hear?
Yeah, I think it takes a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Michael told me he can't see anything with this. Okay, there. Okay, yeah, we can hear you. We got a chat from the viewer. Hello. Let me announce this on social media that we're starting. And cool. Hopefully, yeah, we can hear. It's also called strategic lessons test. Okay, what? Can I change the... this was probably someone did this test. So this is for Twitch. Okay. This should work. This should change the name of the stream too. We have 6 people for now on Twitch. I don't know how many on the other places. Facebook, it's also going, and yeah. Okay, resend the email. Okay, yeah. It's working on YouTube too. And I think for now it's only showing your face, right? So anyway, so give it a few minutes. More people should log on. We have 6 on the Twitch. Anyway, well, people come in. So hi, my name is Rudy. You might have heard my voice in other places. And the idea of today is, well, we usually run a current event stream. We had previously some people on to talk about the labor strikes. We had Paul from the Tempest Collective on, and then we talked a bit previously too about the Texas new laws from before even the Supreme Court thing started. And the idea of today was to get a few people around to talk about, first of all, maybe the state of Palestinian solidarity in the U.S., and second of all, what does this have to do with the whole thing around Jamal Bowman? There's Parker too. And yeah, basically what this has to do with the whole thing around Jamal Bowman and why, essentially, first, what Jamal did was so wrong within the BDS movement. And second, what is the best way to actually hold people like Jamal accountable in the future? Like if the left wants to begin a solid Palestinian, the things that we need, and generally what also kind of things do we need for if the DSA has to ever progress beyond the state it is now. So anyway, so I think you can start at 2:05. Let me see. We're missing still a few people. This is the first time many of us are using this platform. It should work well, but it seems that it's not that well for other people. Okay. That's why I have you maximized. That's why I think now my face is popping up, and I think Parker is there too. Hi, Parker.
Hi. I don't have a webcam.
No worries.
I didn't know I was going to be on. Donald just gave me this link. I thought it was like...
Yeah, unfortunately, Donald said he couldn't make it. He was supposed to host it, so I am hosting this now.
Nice.
Anyway.
I like the background. Is that Luzitsky?
Yeah. Anyway. Cool. So give it 1-2 more minutes. I'm sorry, but we're hoping to get Michael Letwin from the DSA BDS working group, but unfortunately he's not able to log in right now. When he comes in, we can probably start. And then, yeah. Donald should also be sending our contact to some. He said he had found some people from the Palestinian Solidarity Movement who would join us. Okay. Okay, cool. So I'm going to try and call Michael. I'm sorry for this. In the meantime, I don't know, well, maybe Brian, you can introduce yourself and let people know who you are. And Parker, you can also introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Brian Bean. Hi, folks. I'm a socialist activist in Chicago. I'm a member of the Tempest Socialist Collective. I'm a founding editor of Rampant Magazine, and I'm the co-editor and contributor to the book Palestine, A Socialist Introduction.
Hey, Donald. Hey, I'm Parker. I'm one of the founders of Marxist Unity in DSA. I'm part of the River Valley DSA chapter in Western Massachusetts. I'm also an editor of Cosmonaut magazine. Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with you comrades today.
Oh, we finally have Michael here. Hi, Michael.
I'm here.
Oh, Michael, we can hear you now.
Good.
Oh, sorry for that. I don't know what happened. We were just introducing ourselves. So you want to introduce yourself, and then maybe Donald can introduce himself? Michael, I think we lost you again. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you see
Okay,
me?
yeah, sorry.
There we are.
Oh, now we can see. Yes. Okay, and this should allow everyone nicer. Cool. So yeah, do you want to introduce yourself and who you are and what your activism is or organizing is?
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Letwin. I'm involved in a range of Palestine solidarity work, including Labor for Palestine and Block the Boat, Jews for Palestinian Right of Return, and the U.S. campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. But today, in regard to Jamal Bowman, I'm here on behalf of the DSA, BDS, and Palestine Solidarity Working Group. Good to be here.
Great. Cool. Well, welcome everyone. And unfortunately, I just got Donald. Do you want to introduce yourself? And well, basically, you had said that we had some people from Palestinian Voices, and unfortunately, had backed out last minute. What did?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Donald Parkinson. I'm a member of a Space Coast DSA, and I'm in the Marxist Unity group, and we've been campaigning around the Bowman issue, and I guess that's all to introduce myself. I think one thing I kind of wanted to talk about is how do we answer what people say when they argue that Jamal Bowman had no choice but to vote for the Iron Dome because of the redistricting, and that therefore, if we want to be serious about winning elections and be serious about building power, how do we square that? How do we what do we exactly is the response we tell people that when they say that Bowman had no choice if he wanted to get reelected? I think I don't agree with what they're saying, but I think one thing that's something to think about is how do we respond to that allegation or respond to that argument with these people? anyone wants to take that up.
Well, I mean, I can say something about it, which is I think that, BDS, or for that matter, any picket line, is not designed for people who can do it, when it's easy to do it. I mean, they're often, I would say usually, taking place in situations where it's not easy to do it. I mean, certainly in a strike, people have had all kinds of very dire circumstances that they use as reasons to cross picket lines, to be strikebreakers. The need for a job, the need for money, the need for all kinds of things, and those are all understandable. But we don't set up picket lines and then excuse people because it's hard not to cross. It's hard not to honor the picket line. And the same thing applies to BDS. I mean, the Israeli state and the Zionist lobby has made sure that it's not easy to honor BDS or any other part of the Palestinian struggle. They do everything they can to make it impossible or at least very difficult for people to honor BDS, and certainly to pay a very high price. That's the whole meaning of the Israeli response. And so I just think that we wouldn't use that kind of calculus in any other situation where we're asking people to support Black lives or immigrant rights or a strike, and it applies no less to Palestine and BDS. And the other part of it, seems to me, is that people who argue that Bowman should not be held accountable do it on the grounds of this would disrupt unity or there'd be a high price to pay. Seems to me we're paying a very high price for not holding him accountable. First of all, the failure to hold him accountable undermines the organization's credentials, particularly among supporters of Palestine, including young people, people of color, and many others, by sending the message that, for DSA at least, Palestinians and Palestine are expendable. And this only compounds the DSA's previous history of support for Zionism, I mean, pre-2017, when it adopted BDS, and also compounds an impression that DSA as an organization has been largely AWOL from anti-racist struggles, such as the Black Lives Uprising of recent years. So that's number one. And number two, and perhaps most concretely, it actually makes it easier for electoral candidates to bow to intense Zionist pressure by being, quote, progressive except for Palestine. Since DSA, the largest socialist organization in the United States at least, won't make you pay for doing so. And this is particularly dangerous at a time when Israel and the Zionist lobby has ratcheted up attempts to silence Palestinians and Palestine advocates, from attacks on the 6 human rights organizations within Palestine and declaring them to be terrorists, to anti-BDS laws in this country. And that's their entire strategy. They don't argue on the merits. They simply yell anti-Semitism as though anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism were the same thing, and make the political price for supporters of Palestine so high as to deter as many people as they can from supporting Palestine. So if we're giving people a pass, elected officials a pass on this, we're simply saying that there's no pressure from this side, all the pressure's from the other side. It's an invitation, it's an inducement, it's an encouragement, in effect, to violate BDS, because there's no price to be paid for doing so. There's only a price to be paid for honoring BDS. And that's a huge disservice to the BDS movement. And how do we say as an organization that we support Palestinian liberation and BDS, and then turn around and make it easier for people to ignore it?
So a few things before we move on. First of all, I got another request for someone to speak. I'm going to invite them on. So Max Ayel from the Offer of People's New Deal has also been active in Palestinian organizations for some time. Second, maybe Michael, can you explain why BDS is a picket line? Because I don't think, or Brian or someone else, because I don't think enough people realize that it is a picket line. This is not just an issue. This is something requested by Palestinians. So.
Yeah, I could speak to that. I think that the metaphor that Michael mentioned about BDS being a picket line is essential to this entire conversation. And so BDS came about in 2005 when a vast majority of Palestinian civil society unions, community organizations, BDS National Committee is basically the largest Palestinian coalition in the world, called for all individuals internationally who have some form of solidarity with the cause for Palestinians to participate in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is to boycott the Israeli state and companies who profit off of the occupation, to argue for divestment of anything from pensions to other forms of investment in Israeli apartheid, and the other being at this is ultimate sort of height, calling for sanctions. And so that is modeled pretty explicitly on the successful anti-apartheid campaign in South Africa. The whole point being that, one, to put pressure on the Israeli state and those that support it, and to try to make less legitimate the idea that this apartheid state, probably the most racist state in the world, is somehow a normal operator on the level of international politics. And so it's a picket line because it only works if we're able to, particularly people who say that they're in solidarity with Palestine, respect it, that you don't cross the picket line, that you continue to boycott, argue for divestment, and argue for sanctions in regards to that. So I think that's why the metaphor of the picket line is really important. And one of the things I pointed out in an article that is important to put in context is I think there's been such a saturation of pro-Israel sentiment in the United States for a very long time due to the fact that the U.S. has been the prime backer of the Israeli apartheid for many, many, many decades. And so I think what that means is that there is a degree of normalization around Israel that I think that if you put it in various contexts internationally stands out as absurd. And so in thinking about this, I would ask people who say that it's too harsh or whatever to sort of ask for the expulsion of Bowman to think about the context of apartheid South Africa. And if a member of a socialist organization broke the call for boycott against apartheid South Africa and voted for billions of dollars for the racist apartheid government, went and met with P.W. Botha, the government, that people are shocked that there's an outrage about that. Like, it's absurd. And so I think a little bit to sort of dovetail on some of the stuff that Michael was saying that I completely agree with. I think in addition to the question about, well, wouldn't he lose if he didn't back Iron Dome? I would say, but are you saying that socialists should accommodate to the backwards ideas of people in their districts just in order to win? Like, yeah, he might not win, but like, we have to make it a fight. If we're not going to fight around the idea that the U.S. shouldn't support Israel now, then when are you going to do it? Like, what are we waiting for? And so I think that to raise this as an issue, to vote against it, is the very idea that we need to argue with people, that we need to argue with people who are so-called constituents and bring political ideas into the working class, which is what socialists are supposed to do, not just accommodate to the most backward ideas within it.
Yeah, just to respond real quick, I got into a big debate about this with my local DSA chapter, which it was pretty much split 50-50. And, my response to the like, well, he had no choice because he has to represent his constituents is, well, instead of bowing to his constituents, he should have campaigned around the issue. He should have gotten anti-Zionist Jews to come out and speak. He should have actually done like real political struggle around the issue and try to actually rally people around the issue and actually try to change people's minds and actually try to do real political education on this issue instead of just, tailing his constituents. And I think it also shows a fundamentally liberal understanding of politics where, you're elected to office simply to be a kind of conveyor belt for like whatever your constituents like tell you they want. So it completely like it erodes any idea of like actual political struggle in in electoralism.
I think the apartheid South Africa metaphor is interesting, particularly because one of the only DSA electeds before the 2016 revival of the organization was Congressman Ron Dellums, who took like a lonely position against apartheid South Africa in the 1970s. And his position was one of like an agitator, right? And then it was the mass movement around South African freedom that built the kind of popular support for ending apartheid. And I think it was like 15 years later, Ron Dellums' bill actually was passed, Reagan tried to veto it, but they had. I do think like this question is really about like your theory of like what used to be called parliamentarism, but is now called electoralism. Whether the role of an elected to like raise the expectations of the working class and galvanize the mass movement, or if it's to make kind of backroom deals to win reforms. There's a way to win reforms as like an agitator and as someone who is a pure opposition.
So I think that the question is a bit for me also like, what is, how do we make, because it also is a failure of education, because I feel like in many ways people don't take this seriously enough. They think it's just one issue. And I think that also speaks to the failures of the left, that people in my chapter of the essay, for example, were not that aware of what BDS is. So you can be like, yeah, I'm in favor of BDS in the same way I'm in favor of, not invading Cuba. But there's not this awareness. Well, maybe if because I feel like a lot of emphasis has been placed on the Iron Dome vote, which is on itself reprehensible. But there's the idea that, the point of the J Street troops and the point of all of these things is to essentially normalize Israel. And the idea of BDS is to not normalize Israel, to refuse. And I think that's been completely absent from our debate up to now, that this J Street trips are for normalization of Israel, in the sense that, yeah, you can come here like birthright and everything. Come here, talk to us, we're fine. And he went on one of those trips. And I think that's been completely absent from the discussion too.
Could I add something to that, Rudy? I think in the discussion, people talk rightly about Iron Dome and about the J Street trips, but I think that some of that narrows, I think, a broader pattern of Bowman's behavior that I think is important to understand, because it's not as though he like accidentally walked into making some decisions or was tricked into going on the J Street trip. And so at the end of July, he voted for a bill that included $3.3 billion of direct military aid to Israel. So that was before the Iron Dome vote. The Iron Dome vote, which is another $1 billion, means that he has voted in like 2 months' time for $4.3 billion of direct military aid to Israel, which I think is the largest amount that the U.S. has given Israel in direct military aid in about 40 years. On top of that, there's the normalization that I think we can talk about why that's important. And he's a co-sponsor on HR 2749. So HR 2749 is a call for an expansion of the Abraham Accords. So the Abraham Accords is the method of trying to get a normalization of relations between the Arab states and between the state of Israel. It was Trump's like main foreign policy intervention in the Middle East. So this is a very backwards escalation of trying to normalize and develop ties of economic, political relationships between the Arab states and with Israel. The whole point of that being to continue to isolate and ostracize the Palestinians. So I think it's like, in talking about normalization in J Street, that's an important thing to underline, but also his record goes beyond Iron Dome. He has been a consistent backer of Israel in his short tenure, and I see no indication, even after this controversy, of him changing. And so the things that have been said in like the NPC statement about like, let's push him left and sway him, there's no evidence of any of that happening whatsoever. And the burden of proof is on those people who say that it's possible to make it happen, and it's not there.
If I could just add to that, as I understand it, the members of the Palestine Working Group and other DSA reps have been meeting with Bauman about these things since at least May. And a number of discussions took place much more recently, in the middle and end of November, after this issue first arose within DSA. And Bowman, talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk at all. And that's part of what's going on here, is that, he'll give lip service to supporting Palestine. He'll give lip service to opposing at least the 1967 occupation. But when it comes to, walking the walk, he's walking a very different walk. Talk is cheap, and he's essentially giving that kind of lip service while at the same time doing the things that people here have mentioned. So the Palestine Working Group first issued a conditional call for his expulsion on November 17th, the link of which I think is now in the chat. Yeah, thank you. And then based on additional conversations with him and significant attempts to get him to change his position, we only then issued a further statement formally calling for his expulsion on November 29th, a statement which I'll put in the chat as well. And that, is why those calls have happened, because despite the National Political Committee's representations of hopes that he'll change his position or something, there's no reason to think that he will. And again, this emphasizes that it's not about, it may be that in DSA there are people, I'm sure, who don't fully understand BDS, but Jamal Bowman thoroughly understands BDS. He himself claims to recognize that Palestinians are treated unjustly. He made a little photo op into the West Bank during his trip with J Street to kind of, again, talk that talk. But he is making a calculated political decision based on expediency, like every regular politician does, about what they have to do to punch their ticket with the Israel lobby to get reelected. And most of all, not to be attacked by the Israel lobby for not being supportive of Israel and Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. So that's what's going on here. This is not about educating Bowman. It's not about convincing him or persuading him or anything else. He knows what he's doing. He knows why he's doing it. And the only issue is, as with anything else in political life, who has the greatest amount of leverage? And all the leverage on Bowman pretty much is from the other side. And to repeat, by failing to exercise counter pressure on him, he's just being, given a pass, and it's guaranteed that he will continue to take the position he's taking because there's no price to be paid for taking it. And unfortunately, the National Political Committee, which could have exacted some price, is refusing to. And that really, it undermines the whole idea, or actually what it undermines is that the membership of DSA has consistently supported, since 2017, has reiterated its support for BDS. And the leadership of DSA is undermining and eroding that.
And I think there's something else that we should talk about, which is the whole idea of why does the U.S. support Israel so much? Because, you can fall into this inverse idea that the Israeli lobby is what's causing the U.S. to support Israel. But no, the point is Israel exists because it plays a role for the U.S. and for Western imperialism. And, I feel that's also kind of left out of the conversation, because if the DSA or the left in general has to be anti-militarist, anti-imperialist, Israel should be one of the main targets. Israel's role since its foundation, or especially after the 1967 war, has been to act as a soldier of US in the Middle East. It helped invade Egypt and bring down Nasser's, you can say whatever you want about Nasser's policy, but it had an independent policy of the US. Well, Israel stopped that. Israel invaded the Suez Canal with the backing of England and France. Israel is invaded Lebanon several times. It's not a coincidence that the US is supporting Israel, right? It's their player in that field. It's covering that area of the field. And I also feel that's not sufficiently talked about. It's about Israel bad, Israel good, but also what is Israel's position in the world economy or the world empire of the US that causes the US to support it so much. Max, if you're talking, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Max.
I know you've written a lot about this, so maybe.
Yeah, we still can't hear you, Max. Can you? I think you might be muted.
Brian had a similar issue before.
Yeah, Max, try going to your settings and turning off noise suppression. That was a feature that made it where I was muted at first. So go to the little settings button, click on that, go to audio, and unclick noise.
How about now?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the other question is like, what is the soul of the DSA, right? And this is actually just a proxy. It's very much a proxy fight over that. And I think this is not being articulated in part because most of the people with the most prominent platforms in DSA, rather than a lot of, it seems to me, the mass base of the DSA, want the DSA to have a specific soul. I mean, the soul of that they want of the DSA is to essentially be a reformist, opportunist, social democratic party that is fighting for domestic social reforms and is willing to sacrifice on internationalism on every single front possible in order to do so, right? And this is very much tied to institutional bases. This is tied to social reproduction in academia. This is tied to Carnegie Foundation. This is tied to positions at UC Berkeley. This is tied to cross promotion that works through high profile presses getting reviewed in the New York Times, publishing contacts with Norton. This is also due to downwardly mobile or not very downwardly mobile tech workers taking control of what is socialism in the DSA or the United States, right? You have a great variety of forces that are more or less not in favor of a principled internationalism. And then you have a rather inchoate, to some degree, internationalism that is emerging on the flashpoint of Palestine, but is actually something much broader than that, right? I mean, Palestine has been a traditional flashpoint, and I think this, and often the way Palestine has been articulated within the modern U.S. left is not necessarily as an internationalist cause, in fact, which is, I think, unfortunate for our contemporary understanding of supporting Arab national liberation. But with that said, the flashpoint is fundamentally, is the DSA going to be a mass mobilizing, fighting organization that actually takes national liberation in the periphery seriously, or is it going to be a reformist social democratic organization that basically subordinates national liberation in the periphery, of which Palestine is the most obvious, but far from the only example? Is it going to be an organization that subordinates that to pretending to try to get social democratic legislators into Congress who can supposedly, at some unknowable and really non-existent future, actually implement systemic change, right? That's actually the argument that's going on in DSA, even if it is not necessarily being articulated as such. And I think this needs to be brought out, and we're going to see. I mean, I think there's also another element which is unfortunately has come to the fore, unfortunately, which is how did the NPC come to make this decision, right? How did the NPC come to make this decision? The NPC, in fact, came to make this decision because they were in consultation with the BNC National Committee, right? Which has actually carried out purges of communists from boycott, isn't representative on the ground, is increasingly constituting a Palestinian right? This is something that isn't being said. They were in consultation with the NPC, right? This has actually been openly stated on the internet. People don't want to talk about it. This is constituting a right wing of the Palestinian nationalist movement. And if people are not willing to actually differentiate to the fact that the Palestinian national movement has left and right wings, has fractious and conflicted internal politics. In other words, if people don't want to understand that Palestinians are political subjects, just like everyone else, with their own internal political fissures and fights, then you're not going to understand what's going on. You're going to say, I want to elevate this or that Palestinian voice, rather than saying, I align with this or that Palestinian politic. And I think we need to think about, I align with this or that Palestinian politic, if we actually want to advance and have principled and rational political debates about how to advance the cause of Palestinian and Arab national liberation.
Somebody wants to respond to that. The floor is open.
So I'm getting echo. I think someone needs to mute.
Yeah, Max, I think you have to enable the echo disruption.
So, I fundamentally agree with the question here that it's a battle over what is the soul of the DSA. Is this, are we going to, horse trade essentially our anti-imperialist principles in the name of getting people elected who, who. One of the big arguments is, Bowman's a big Green New Deal guy, and I think, if we want to win the Green New Deal, we need to make compromises. But I'm confused. Max, when you mentioned the right wing of the Palestinian movement, are you talking about the official BDS that said? because I remember that the NPC at DSA, they cited the official BDS organization as a reason for not expelling Bowman, and they said that, well, we argue for flexibility in coalition partners. We understand this, and so therefore, this is the kind of flexibility we need to have, and we can, we just need to kind of understand that coalition partners will make compromises, and we need to kind of work with them and push them to the left. Is that what you're referencing?
You can hear me? Yeah. I mean, it's very unfortunate, right? But it's important to have clarity about the things as they are rather than as we might wish them to be. I mean, that statement from the BNC was explicitly put out to support the decision of the NPC, right? There's not a way around it. That was explicitly put out and released to support the position of the DSA NPC in taking an electoral opportunist reformist position with respect to Bowman and with respect to Palestinian national liberation more broadly, right? It wasn't the position of Palestinian Youth Movement. It wasn't the position of AROC. It wasn't the position of a great many of most of the anti-Zionist organizations in the United States. It wasn't the position of Samidun. So whose position was it, right? It was the position of a specific formation in Palestinian society who have a specific politics, right? It's important to be clear about it. Now, one can agree or disagree with the decisions they make. But to me, those are rightist, accommodationist positions, right? I mean, as someone who studies national liberation movements have a right wing and a left wing. They always have. I mean, that is the story of decolonization. There's a right wing and there's a left wing. And from my perspective, the left wing position, the proper internationalist position to take in the current juncture was to pressure the MPC to expel Bowman, right? That is how you consolidate an internationalist principled line in the DSA as a mass organization and associate socialism with national liberation, both on the American left and in the eyes of an international audience that is looking and seeing what is the American left considering about Palestine and internationalist causes more broadly, right? In fact, the opposite happened, right? I mean, and it's of course a right-wing position above all because it's not going to work, right? I mean, we know this, right? I don't think anyone on this call disputes it. This idea of working through trying to swing pseudo-sympathetic Congress people is a farcical position, right? This is a dead-end position, right? So the idea of emitting a statement to support tactical and strategic flexibility at an exact moment when the NPC is making a decision that actually is so manifestly a poor decision by any measure, right, from the perspective of anti-Zionism. Okay, then that's consolidating a right-wing position, a dead-end position within the Palestinian national movement at this moment. I don't think there's a way around it.
I don't know if Michael or Brian want to add to this. Especially Michael as a DSA, BDS person.
I'm sorry, Rudy, I didn't catch, you were kind of echoed.
Well, basically, if you wanted to comment on this, the different statements from the DAS groups.
Well, I mean, I don't know about, I mean, Max, I think you're talking about the BNC, the Boycott National Committee here. When you talk about the right wing, yeah. I haven't seen some of what you're referring to. I mean, I know that the BNC did issue a statement during this, basically reiterating that people should not collaborate with J Street. But I haven't seen anything else concerning, maybe they did it about Bowman. Maybe they did it, more generally, and that was what the meaning of it was, I guess is what you're saying. I'm not disputing that. I just haven't seen, I'm not aware of those statements. I do think, it would be good if the BNC supported the call to expel Bowman. I mean, for all the reasons that we all talked about here, that's what BDS means. When people don't respect the BDS picket line, you hold them accountable. And it seems to me that is cut and dry. But I'm not familiar enough, perhaps, with the internal workings of what you're referring to comment on that. I will say that, as Max referenced, there are some very important Palestine solidarity and Palestinian organizations that have signed on to the DSA, or the Palestine Working Group's call for expulsion. These include AROC, the Arab Resources Organizing, folks in the Bay Area who have spearheaded, among other things, Block the Boat, which is perhaps one of the most effective BDS movements or actions of any kind anywhere. That is to have to build a labor community coalition to stop Israeli shipping from landing anywhere on the West Coast, which is what they've successfully done now for a number of years. And they've signed on National Students for Justice in Palestine, the Palestine Youth Movement, as people have mentioned, and others. So obviously there are Palestinian individuals, at least, who are taking a contrary position, and that does, I think, reflect some fundamental differences within Palestinian national movement. And all I can say is that, as people have said earlier, if this was about anything except Palestine, there'd be no question. If this was about apartheid South Africa or anything else, or any other picket line, there'd be no question that we would call for expulsion of somebody who violated that, especially somebody who voted in Congress to violate it. But the fact that it's about Palestine somehow makes it different. And so that's our job, right, is to make sure that it's not different, to fight normalization, to fight Zionism, to make it clear, as especially the Black-led movements and folks of color movements in this country have increasingly done, to talk about intersectionality in regard between, say, Black for Palestine and vice versa, and that these movements are indelibly linked, and all of the movements of oppression have to be indelibly linked with Palestine and vice versa. So that, it does seem to me, is very clear. I'm also less, I'm involved in DSA to the extent of the Palestine Working Group. I joined DSA about a year ago only because DSA was taking, I thought, a strong position, or at least the Palestine Working Group does take a strong position for Palestine and for BDS. And it should be noted that the calls by the Palestine Working Group to expel Bowman have been endorsed by, have been voted for by the overwhelming number of members of the Palestine Working Group. So I think it is a real test. And yes, it does reflect broader debates, I think, that Max has alluded to here within DSA about what DSA is, the soul of DSA. And nothing anywhere is as indicative of that kind of struggle as Palestine. It is now, it always has been. The US left has a very checkered history when it comes to Palestine. DSA, as I said earlier, prior to 2017, was essentially a Zionist organization. And it's only as a result of this massive influx of young DSA members around that time that the position changed, and the old timers, many of them resigned. But the question of where is DSA going? Is it going to, and especially at a time when things are breaking open for BDS. I mean, every time the Zionist state viciously brutalizes Palestine, at least, it does it every day. But when the major flare-ups take place in Sheikh Jarrah, in Gaza, as it does periodically when Israel massacres Palestinians in Gaza with U.S. weapons every so often, quite often, in fact, those are the flashpoints that cause a massive upsurge in opposition to Israel, to Zionism, including among a growing number of young American Jews, but others as well, and support for BDS. And that's why we have this blowback by the Zionist forces against BDS to try to just make it impossible, just lock it down, make it illegal, make it silenced. The US Supreme Court is about to decide BDS law's constitutionality and anti-BDS law's constitutionality. And there's every fear that they will say that it is constitutional to ban BDS, basically. So, this is the battleground that we're in. And so at a moment in particular like that, any moment for sure, but especially a moment like this, when those kinds of things are on the table or on the line, to have DSA leadership refuse to hold the line on BDS is really destructive.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, I think some of the comments that Max and Michael were making reminded me of Donald's question kind of at the beginning about is it that he kowtowed to his constituents, which is the reason why this happened, And I think that this kind of soul of DSA question, and I speak this, I'm not a member of DSA. I have been doing work around Palestine for a very long time, so that's my disclaimer about that. But I think that the notion that the reason why he voted on Iron Dome is due to the 7% of Jewish folks in his constituency misses the overriding question, which is that of the Democratic Party. And so I think it's not just the constituents in his war, but the fact that support for Israel is still an across the board price of entry for the Democratic Party. I think there's been some exceptions. I think Rashida Tlaib has pushed that back a little bit, and some of the other sort of squad folks, but that is still a very, very small amount, and the squad has not been able to hold a consistent vote around these questions. For the 3.3 billion that Bowman voted for in July, AOC and Tlaib and some other folks voted against it. Ilhan Omar, who some people consider the best on imperialism, as some of these folks, voted for $3.3 billion for Israel. On the Iron Dome vote, AOC at the last minute abstained. And so I think that it's not just about the constituents or people in the district, but it's about the fact that the price of entry for the Democratic Party is still support for Israel. And I think that's an important key, because the disciplining doesn't just come from those folks and electoral sort of whatever, but the fact that, as Max was saying, support for Israel is still a key linchpin in U.S. imperialism. The U.S. still wants to dominate the Middle East, to keep it as a single economic zone under their thumb. The strategy about going that is the normalization of Israel and the Arab states. Trump sort of pursued that, and when Biden came in, despite all the progressive gloss that some of my erstwhile socialist comrades tried to put on him, he said, I'm not going to move the capital away from Jerusalem, and actually praised the Abraham Accord and normalizing, and is continuing that work. And so I think that the strategy of the Democratic Party to consolidate the Middle East, which is still strategically important due to shipping, due to oil, due to its just location in the world, to keep that as a solid base to be able to shift towards military competition with China, is a key part of what Biden says that he's going to do when he says, I want to put the U.S. at the head of the world table. And we know that anytime the U.S. is at the head of the world table, it's bad for the people of the world. And so it's about, not just his constituency. It's not just about sort of the general, will the left have an anti-imperialist politics, but it's about the question of the Democratic Party. And I think that until we get to that question, until we're able to sort of pull that out, we're going to have to fight these kind of battles, these skirmishes around the edges, as opposed to go to the central piece, which is the Democratic Party is a party of imperialism. And as long as we have candidates that we aren't our candidates, but we just endorse them, like Jamal Bowman isn't a DSA candidate. He's a DSA member who ran and DSA endorsed. AOC isn't a DSA candidate. She's a DSA member who DSA endorsed. Then the question of accountability becomes just like that of any trade union or NGO, which we're going to try to cater for influence or hold accountable by all these sort of things, as opposed to being like, how are we actually going to build a hardened core against imperialism in this country? And it's not about capitulating. It's not about the vagaries of strategy years around. It's like, how can we build a bright red line around the questions of no votes for U.S. imperialism, no support for Israel, and campaign around that? It's a fight that we're not going to be able to dodge. And so we need to start taking it on.
I couldn't agree more with that. By the way, is my mic better now? Can you guys hear me better? Cool. Yeah, I think that whole, it's all about, the price of entry thing is totally correct. It's all about proving you're safe for governing imperialism, even if you're a part of the left. Like, I think the Jerusalem Post came out with an article that was saying, oh, there's plenty of people on the responsible left in European left parties that, don't call for, anti-Zionism. And I think, with this whole AOC, like the AOC changing her vote to present on the Iron Dome funding, if you watch the video of that, she's like in a little huddle with Nancy Pelosi beforehand. You can see, you can't hear what they're saying, but you can kind of visually see Pelosi just like berating her, and then her going over and changing her vote. So it's like, I do think it is about this, like, this theory of electoralism. Is it, we're going to win things through horse trading, like Donald said, like, who knows what, Pelosi was telling her she had to change her vote for, oh, we're not going to give you this committee assignment, blah, blah, blah. Or are you going to run as a kind of principled opposition to the capitalist class rule? And I think the current way that DSA does this has kind of been obscured in a way. There was kind of a relationship of convenience where we'll give you our endorsement and our door knockers, and you get the socialist brand. And then we get legitimacy by saying, oh, look, we can put socialists in Congress. But there's a total incongruence there between the actual politics that most DSA members have and the political strategy we're pursuing. If you look at the DSA platform, which was adopted this year at convention, it's actually a fairly radical platform. And I do think like the people who were against expulsion are actually pretty serious about, at least inside in their own personal beliefs about BDS. Like I know some people in my chapter, we had a resolution to support the Madison letter for expulsion, and it failed by a tie actually. But the people really whipping hardest against it were people who were ex-ISO, people who have actually years and years of history with SJP and all sorts of pro-Palestine organizations. So I really think it's less about their personal moral beliefs and this kind of strategy that oh look, we're getting close to power, we have to like put away certain principles so that we can like have political legitimacy. And I think that it's true, we're going to lose more if we do take a principled electoral stance and actually run DSA members on our actual platform that we believe in. It's going to be harder, and it's but that's how the socialist movement has done things historically. At least the principled socialist movement has done things historically. I don't remember what year this was, but in the early 1900s there was a big crisis in the German Socialist Party because one of their members in parliament voted to fund the naval bill. And back then, the party held their parliamentarians accountable and said that you're not allowed to fund any military budget of the Prussian government at all. And it was this huge crisis because this guy, basically did what Bowman did and went against the party wishes. So I think, we need to have this idea of party building where we actually are putting a socialist fraction accountable to our platform in legislatures. And yeah, it's going to be harder to win, but I think it's necessary. And I think this whole thing, has exposed a really deep incongruence between our own political beliefs and our political strategy. And yeah, it's true that what Gamison is saying in the comments. It's a fear of stopping doing what we've been doing, as that's what's ostensibly got us to 95,000 members. Yeah, that's it gives DSA legitimacy. But I think is it good to have 95,000 members when 85% of them are inactive? And of course it is good to have legitimacy, but I think there's a way to move towards a more principled political position.
I think in the end, something that's missing, like we're you don't want to isolate whatever voters of Bauman nationally are. If you don't want to isolate them because whatever reason, you want Bauman to be reelected, how many Arabs, how many Palestinians are we isolating by taking this stance, right? Because when I went to when we were having the protests for last 7-8 months ago on the last the Sheikh Jarrah incidents followed by the bombardment of Gaza, more than half the demonstration out there in Houston were Arabs. They were not leftists. They were Arabs who had come. The mosques had brought them over, and or they had just organized politically as Arabs. And these people are completely left out of the conversation, right? And they're saying, like, yeah, you might be losing this left liberal progressive who might be off-put by this, but same time, there's a whole constituency of brown people you're missing if you just take the line that, yeah, we should just compromise on this. Because of course, we shouldn't just look at numbers. We should do things which we believe advance the movement. But if you're looking at numbers, you should not forget that other number of people who are very supportive of Palestinian, more from a nationalist perspective, but who can be won to anti-imperialist politics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's the issue of can we be a minority position? I think there is an issue of support for Palestine and anti-Zionism. I think it's not quite the minority position that it was at a certain point. I think it's been growing, but it still is not the the hegemonic position, even in like American liberalism. And so the question is, are we willing to go against the the hegemonic positions of liberalism, or are we willing to stand with the oppressed and exploited of the world and try to organize those people into a political movement? And I think by choosing one over the other, DSA is essentially making a statement about what kind of organization it is. And I think another issue here is in DSA, to get expelled from DSA in the Constitution, it says that you have to go against the principles of DSA as an organization. So essentially, by choosing to not expel Bowman, it is essentially saying that Bowman did not go against the principles of our organization, which is essentially saying that BDS is not, according to the MPC, a principle of DSA, a core principle of DSA. And there are a lot of people in DSA who disagree with that. And so I think there is a real issue there of how do we define what the principles of this organization are? How do we define what counts as crossing the line to the point where membership is no longer acceptable? So I think moving forward, we have to try to figure out how do we kind of determine what the real principles of this organization are, and how do we establish them as kind of picket lines that can't be crossed? How do we establish them as lines that can't be broken? And I think there are people who have argued that DSA wouldn't have accepted this if someone voted against like the PRO Act or the Green New Deal. I'm not sure exactly if DSA has any line that it's willing to like not let be crossed at this point. I think there really has been no serious discussion of this issue until now, honestly. And I think moving forward, there has to be a real serious question of like, what are the lines that can be drawn? And I think as of now, like it's not looking good. It's essentially like you're saying anti-imperialism is a line that can be crossed in the name of broader demands like the Green New Deal.
I wonder if we should talk about the NPC statement itself, because I actually haven't read it that closely. I'd be interested to hear what people thought about that specific.
Oh yeah, we could put it up on the screen and kind of just go through it, actually, if you want to do that. Here, I'll can you link it real quick so I don't have to Google it? Okay. All right, I'm gonna. You want me to screen share here?
Yeah, if you can. I was gonna say we're already like 1 hour in, so if we want to, like give any pointers or how long do we want to go on for, I'll share it in the meantime.
Okay, you got it.
I have it. I'll do that. But yeah.
All right, sweet.
I will say though, I wasn't really disheartened by this whole process as much as I was actually, optimistic that we're actually having these kind of deep organization-wide strategic debates. I wasn't really expecting expulsion because, any of the resolutions at the convention